The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 21, Episode 2, The Cushing Brothers, Part 2, written by Gary Pollard. Gary is a retired lawyer and businessman who spent most of his career in legal publishing. He now lives near Denver, Colorado. Raised on the north bank of the Potomac River near Washington, D.C., Gary acquired a love for the American Civil War through travels with his father among the region's battlefields. This early exposure has grown into a lifelong interest in history generally. The story of the Cushing brothers is an extension of a presentation to the Rocky Mountain Civil War Round Table, which meets in Littleton, Colorado. On July 3rd, 1863, the third day of fighting at Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee planned a frontal assault intended to pierce the centre of the Union line. This attack is remembered as Pickett's Charge, named for the Confederate general who commanded the largest division committed. The charge, by 9 infantry brigades, almost 13,000 men, was preceded by an artillery bombardment from over 100 Confederate guns. The visual objective for the attacking troops was an isolated group of trees visible on Cemetery Ridge. This ground was defended by Hancock's Second Corps, and in their midst was Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery, under the command of Brevet Lieutenant Colonel Alonzo Cushing. Posted by a jog in a stone wall, later known as the Angle, Cushing's battery was at the epicenter of the intense Confederate bombardment. 4 of the 6 3-inch ordnance rifles in Battery A were disabled before the Confederate infantry began its advance. The battery lost so many men to the bombardment that nearby Union infantrymen were drafted to help serve the 2 surviving cannons. Alonzo himself was in terrible condition, wounded in the shoulder and groin by Confederate shells. He was bleeding profusely. Repeatedly urged to leave the field to seek medical attention, Alonzo refused, saying, "I will stay right here and fight it out or die in the attempt." As the bombardment ended and the Confederate troops advanced toward them, Alonzo and his men stood by the 2 remaining rifles. Opening with spherical case and solid shot, the battery switched to double loads of canister as the advancing Confederate forces neared. Having lost his glove in the fighting, Alonzo used his bare thumb to cover the vent hole on one of the rifles, burning the flesh away to the bone. Battery A was at the point of the furthest Confederate advance, later romanticized as the high water mark of the Confederacy. At the climax of the attack, the already gravely injured Alonzo was killed instantly when a bullet struck him just below the nose. Confederate General Lewis Armistead, one of Pickett's brigade commanders, fell nearby and was captured, having received 3 wounds. The Confederate attack was repulsed, but the battered Union forces failed to launch a counterattack. Alonzo was among 1,500 Union casualties who fell while inflicting over 50% losses in killed, wounded and captured among the rebel attackers. Alonzo's body was recovered by men from his battery. They removed the shoulders of his jacket as mementos for his family. Hearing of Alonzo's death, Milton Jr. and William proceeded separately to Gettysburg. Milton arrived first, collected Alonzo's body from his comrades, obtained a coffin, and accompanied his fallen brother by train to West Point, New York. William, arriving after Milton Jr.'s departure, recorded an appalling scene of death and devastation. The field, when I reached it, was a sickening sight. 30,000 wounded men and thousands of unburied dead lay on the earth, in the road, field, wood and orchard, and on the bare hillside amidst all the wreck of a great valley. Our army had moved on in pursuit of the foe, and there was nothing left for me to do but return to naval duty. In the siege lines in front of Vicksburg, Howard was savouring the capitulation of the rebel defenders on July the 4th when he learnt of Alonzo's death at Gettysburg. Facing legal and bureaucratic hurdles daunting to even someone as determined as Cushing, Howard launched a campaign to be allowed to take Alonzo's place with Battery A, 4th United States Artillery. Regulations discouraged movement between the volunteers and the regular army. Other obstacles included a change in theatres, Alonzo's 3-year enlistment, and a promotion to officer rank. Union Secretary of War Edwin Stanton denied Howard's initial request. William and Milton Jr. redoubled their efforts to support Howard's request, appealing personally to Stanton and applying pressure through Assistant Navy Secretary Gustavus Fox. Abraham Lincoln provided a written endorsement of the move in late August 1863, but stopped short of issuing an order. Ultimately, Stanton relented and approved the transfer. After fighting at the Battle of Chattanooga, Howard resigned from the Illinois militia and was commissioned as a second lieutenant, 4th U.S. Artillery, on December 8, 1863. Upon reporting for duty with his new unit at Brandy Station, Virginia, Howard was presented with the shoulder straps that had been saved from Alonzo's jacket at Gettysburg. Returning to sea duty in late summer 1863, William soon received orders from Assistant Secretary of the Navy Fox to take command of the 655-ton screw-steam gunboat USS Monticello. Fox made it clear this new assignment was a reward, writing, "You are ordered this command for distinguished services rendered." Built in 1859, Monticello was a fast, modern vessel that was well suited to William Cushing's slashing style of patrol and raiding. But she had been on duty since the start of the war and was in dire need of refurbishment. William took Monticello to Philadelphia and dry dock and found himself ashore through most of the rest of 1863. Again, a Cushing appeared at one of the signature moments of the U.S. Civil War. William travelled back to Gettysburg in mid-November to attend the dedication of the National Cemetery, where Lincoln made his brief remarks remembered as the timeless Gettysburg Address. In a less soaring moment, William spent a brief time in a Philadelphia jail that same November. A man confronted William at his hotel, saying, "Here's one of Lincoln's hirelings come to intimidate us at the election." William beat him with a cane, cutting the man's face. Arrested and taken to jail, William's freedom was secured by sympathetic locals who paid his fine. Before leaving the city to resume sea duty, William went to the man's business, pulled him from behind the counter, and thrashed him a second time. As 1864 began, William and the Monticello were moved south to help tighten the blockade of North Carolina ports, which remained a source of critical supplies for the Confederate forces in the east. It was for exploits in this region that William Cushing would win renown. William's aggressive nature was often a trial to his superiors. As a step toward closing the port of Wilmington, North Carolina, William advocated the capture of Smith Island at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. His local superior demurred, unwilling to assume the risk. To demonstrate the island's vulnerability, William led a night raid ashore against the headquarters of the local Confederate commander, General Louis Hebert, with the intent on taking him captive. Hebert was away in Wilmington, so William had to settle for his chief engineer, Captain Patrick Kelly. Returning safely to the Monticello with his prize, William sent a boat ashore the next day under a flag of truce to obtain clothing and money for Kelly's comfort as a prisoner. The visit also provided a pretext for delivering a note to General Hebert. "Dear General, I deeply regret that you were not at home when I called. Very respectfully, W.P. Cushing." While some viewed William's act of bravado as foolishness, it added to his good standing among the U.S. Navy's civilian leaders. After a lacklustre stretch of offshore blockade patrol in late spring 1864, William hatched his next scheme. He proposed a small boat raid up the Cape Fear River to neutralize the ironclad CSS Raleigh. Leveraging his favourable standing with higher powers, William circumvented his cautious local superior and obtained approval from Union Squadron Commander Flag Officer Samuel P. Lee. With 15 volunteers, William set out in an oared cutter up the Cape Fear in search of the Raleigh. Coming under fire from the shore at Fort Anderson, William pretended to retreat and then continued upriver. Capturing a party of local fishermen, William learned that the Raleigh had been destroyed, having become stranded on a sandbar and crushed by the weight of her own armour. His initial objective gone, William elected to continue upriver to scout Wilmington's defences. Hidden in the reeds and brush along the river, William made copious notes about fortifications and patrols. He and his party also continued to accumulate prisoners, including the mailman bound for Fort Fisher. Rations exhausted, William took a bold risk to obtain food. One of their captives, a hunter, owned a local general store. William sent a disguised Union sailor to the store, who mentioned the owner's name and used the owner's money to buy supplies from his wife. Deciding to press his luck no further, William released his prisoners and headed downstream. He only stopped to leave a note on a buoy. After the raid on General Hebert's headquarters, a colonel in the local rebel forces had sworn there would be no repetition. Always cheeky, William left his regards. Pursuit mounted as William and his crew fled down the Cape Fear toward the safety of Union blockaders outside the bar. At least 4 boats of rebels were on the water, seeking to block their escape. Through superior seamanship and a favourable wind, William and his exhausted crew crossed the bar ahead of their pursuers and were finally able to hail a Union steamer. Returned to the Monticello, William collapsed into his bunk, having been awake for 68 hours of the raid. At age 21, Lieutenant William Cushing continued to be the plague and the pride of all who knew him. His foray up the Cape Fear to near Wilmington had been a great success, full of bold exploits and narrow escapes. William had confirmed the destruction of the ironclad Raleigh, scouted rebel defences, captured dispatches and humiliated his foes. A letter from Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles in July 1864 summarised the administration's regard. The boldness exhibited by you in this reconnaissance and the success attended to it are most gratifying to the department. That same month, William was commanding the Monticello on blockade patrol off the North Carolina coast. Encountering the British-flagged brig Hound, the Monticello had to fire warning shots before the Hound would heave to for inspection. While on board the Hound, the Monticello's inspector was roundly cursed by the Hound's captain. When William learned of this abuse after the Hound was released, he pursued the British vessel, stopped her again, and extracted an apology from the Hound's offending captain. While not another Trent affair, William's action drew official British diplomatic complaint and exacerbated already strained international relations. The US response to the British attributed the excessive reaction to Lieutenant Cushing's youth and inexperience. This excuse was supported by a letter of censure to William from Gideon Welles. Such proceedings repeated cannot fail to bring upon you the serious displeasure of your government and result to your regret and injury. Making his way from Tennessee to Virginia, Howard Cushing joined Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery, with the Army of the Potomac in time for the start of the Overland Campaign in May 1864. Attached to the Cavalry Corps under Major General Philip Sheridan, Howard's battery fought in the battle known as Todd's Tavern, part of the struggle by the Army of the Potomac to emerge from the toils of the wilderness and beat Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia to the strategic crossroads at Spotsylvania Courthouse. The Union forces did not win the race, and the armies locked in a deadly embrace at Spotsylvania for 2 weeks. Seeking to sustain momentum, Sheridan won approval to take his 10,000 cavalry troopers toward Richmond and draw famed Confederate cavalry chief Jeb Stuart into a fight. This move resulted in the huge cavalry conflict known as the Battle of Yellow Tavern, where Stuart fell with a trooper's bullet in the stomach. This was to be Howard's final combat action of the American Civil War. Battery A had suffered so many casualties since the start of the campaign that it was withdrawn to the vicinity of Washington, D.C. for refitting. After being withdrawn from the Virginia campaign, Howard had the opportunity to visit family and friends around Fredonia, New York. While there, Howard was called upon to direct artillery forces deployed to quell a prisoner of war disturbance at a huge POW camp in Elmira, New York. Suffering a 25% death rate and known to prisoners as Hellmira, the camp was a tinderbox. A contemporary recorded Lieutenant Cushing's remarks to the prisoners. While sharing William's force and determination, Howard lacked his brother's impish and chivalrous style. "I am just up from the front, where I have been killing such infernal wretches as you are. You are a crowd of insolent, cowardly scoundrels, and if I had command of this prison, I would discipline you or kill you, and I would much prefer to kill you. If you give me occasion, I would be glad to dam the river with your worthless carcasses." The prisoner uprising was successfully put down. Since 1862, Union forces had occupied a number of fortified enclaves in North Carolina. Located at the head of deep water navigation on North Carolina rivers, these Union-controlled ports served to foreclose blockade running and represented potential jumping-off points for invasion of the interior. One such enclave was Plymouth, located on the Roanoke River near where it flowed into Albemarle Sound. The Confederates had built an ironclad, the CSS Albemarle, in a cornfield up the Roanoke beyond the reach of Union ships. In April 1864, the Albemarle came downstream to Plymouth during the high water. The ironclad's first engagement was against two Union gunboats, Miami and Southfield. The Union cannons were ineffective against the rebel armour. The Southfield was sunk, and the Miami's commander, William's friend Charles Flusser, was killed by a rebounding shell. His ship was forced to flee for survival. Unsupported by the Union Navy, Plymouth fell to the rebels. In May, the Albemarle fended off an assault by 4 Union gunboats and kept Union naval forces at bay for the balance of the summer. The Union was unable to bring a deep-draft Monitor-type ironclad to Plymouth to counter the Albemarle. William Cushing, swearing vengeance for Charles Flusser's death, submitted several schemes for destroying Albemarle. After reading the account of William's raid up the Cape Fear River, Flag Officer Samuel Lee decided to endorse Cushing's plan for a stealthy small boat attack. "Bring me Lieutenant Cushing. I have some work for him." Higher authority attached little hope for success of the expedition. Assistant Navy Secretary Fox reluctantly approved the attempt. In the interim, Admiral David Dixon Porter, famed for his campaigns with Ulysses Grant along the Mississippi, had been appointed to replace Flag Officer Lee. Dixon proved sceptical of Cushing's scheme, but let it proceed. William acquired 2 45-foot, 14-metre steam launches in New York, along with spar-mounted torpedoes. One launch was captured by Confederates in Virginia during transit. The remaining launch was mounted with a field gun on the bow and rigged to tow a cutter filled with troops. William was the nerve centre of the attack. He held 5 lines, one to signal the cannoner on the bow, another to the man controlling the spar, 2 to operate the torpedo itself, and the last to the man working the steam engine throttle at the stern. The party set out on the night of October 27, 1864. Nearing Plymouth, the towed cutter was released to deal with suspected rebel pickets stationed on hulks sunk in the Roanoke River. Approaching the Albemarle in the dark, the launch was detected and the alarm raised among the Confederate defenders. The crew on the Albemarle began to load its 6.4-inch rifles. Seeing that the ironclad was surrounded by a protective log boom, William ordered the launch out into the river. Turning back toward Albemarle and signalling full throttle, the launch sped toward its target. William ordered the canister-loaded deck gun fired to discourage defenders. The launch slid up and over the log boom. William signalled to have the torpedo spar extended and lowered. Gauging momentum, William pulled the lanyard to release the torpedo from the spar, and seconds later he pulled the lanyard to detonate it. The torpedo exploded just as the Albemarle fired its rifle nearest the launch. Though not struck by cannon fire, the combined explosions disabled the launch. William called to his companions to save themselves and dove into the dark water. Of the 14 other volunteers, 11 were taken prisoner, 2 died in the cold river, and 1 escaped. William swam away in the darkness and hid among the rushes along the riverbank. The Albemarle, meantime, settled into the muddy river bottom. It had a hole in its hull big enough to drive a wagon through. In the morning, William encountered a slave fishing along the river who confirmed the ironclad's destruction. Stealing a small boat from a rebel platoon searching along the river, William rowed out into Albemarle Sound until he found the USS Valley City the following night. News of the Albemarle's sinking electrified the Union forces, who quickly assaulted and recaptured Plymouth. Sir, I have the honour to report that the rebel ironclad Albemarle is at the bottom of the Roanoke River. So begins Lieutenant William Cushing's official report to Admiral Porter. As news of the sinking of Albemarle spread, William became a celebrity in the Union and beyond. The papers referred to him as Albemarle Cushing. U.S. Navy officers were ineligible for the Medal of Honor until 1915, but William received an even rarer honor, the thanks of Congress, awarded only 30 times in the American Civil War, compared to 1,523 Medal of Honor recipients. William joined an elite roster that included Ulysses Grant, William T. Sherman, and his own squadron commander, David Dixon Porter. William was immediately promoted to lieutenant commander at the tender age of 22 and made Admiral Porter's flag captain aboard the USS Malvern. Granted prize money for the sinking of the Albemarle, William turned the first installment of $6,000 over to his mother. Granted leave to rest and visit home, William received acclaim and additional honours during his travel to and from Fredonia. Returning to active duty, William found the role of flag captain, serving the squadron commander, too confining. Apparently by mutual agreement with Admiral Porter, William was soon back in command of Monticello, with freedom to pursue his instincts on patrol. Wilmington, North Carolina remained the last major Atlantic port available to the Confederacy. Closing this leak in the blockade became a major aim of the administration, with both Navy and Army resources allocated to the campaign. To reach Wilmington, Union forces needed to capture Fort Fisher at the entrance to the Cape Fear River. In preparation for an attack in late December 1864, William volunteered to scout a channel for the deep-draft Union warships. Donning full-dress uniform, William commanded a cutter that took depth soundings for hours while under fire from Fort Fisher and adjacent shore batteries. This first Union assault failed and led to the dismissal of the senior political general Ben Butler. The second assault, less than 3 weeks later in January 1865, succeeded. In the second assault, William participated in a ground attack force composed of sailors and marines. The naval force suffered heavy casualties. William lost 2 close friends from the academy during the attack, but it served as a diversion for the separate victorious army charge. William was commended for leadership on the battlefield in rallying the badly mauled Navy survivors. With the fall of Fort Fisher, other rebel defences along the Cape Fear River began to fall. Batteries closest to the river entrance were abandoned, and William and his crew went by cutter to raise the stars and stripes at several former Confederate strongpoints. During the follow-up campaign against Wilmington, William was the author of 2 successful ruses de guerre. Capturing local pilots, William forced them to divulge the signals used to direct blockade runners up the river. News of Fort Fisher's fall having not reached ships at sea, William was able to lure 2 blockade runners to an anchorage upriver where they were gathered up as prizes. Further up the river toward Wilmington, the rebel strongpoint Fort Anderson held out. Borrowing a trick that had been used on the Mississippi, William proposed that a fake monitor be constructed from canvas, wood, and barrels. The deception worked. Thinking that a powerful monitor had found its way across the bar and up the river, the defenders abandoned Fort Anderson on February the 18th, and Union forces occupied Wilmington several days later. William managed to pass the remaining 2 months of the American Civil War without incident. Both Howard and William remained in the U.S. military after the war. Howard was suspended from the army for a year following a court-martial. His immediate superior had been arrested by Washington, D.C. police for drunkenly riding a horse along a wooden sidewalk. Howard rounded up men from the battery and attempted to intimidate district officials into releasing his captain. Convicted and suspended from service, Howard returned to duty in April 1867. Upon his return to the army, Howard achieved another hard-fought triumph over military bureaucratic inertia. Like his 1863 move from Illinois militia to U.S. regulars, Howard's goal was blocked by regulation. His aim was to switch from the artillery to the cavalry so he could participate in the active campaign against Native Americans on the western frontier. His requests to transfer repeatedly denied, Howard finally found a lieutenant in the 3rd United States Cavalry who agreed to swap assignments. After various delays and a long overland march, Howard finally arrived in the American Southwest in October 1868, took command of Troop F, 3rd U.S. Cavalry at Fort Bascom in the northeast corner of New Mexico Territory. Duty in the cavalry in the southwestern desert was hard. Chronically under strength, Troop F often had fewer than 50 men present for duty, equipped. Conditions were harsh. One of Troop F's assigned camps was Fort Grant, the most godforsaken post of all those supposed to be included in the annual congressional appropriations. Yet Howard excelled in this setting, learning the cavalryman's trade and growing as a leader. John Bourke, Howard's second-in-command, said of his immediate superior, "He was about 5'7" in height, spare, sinewy, active as a cat, slightly stoop-shouldered, sandy-complexioned, keen grey or bluish-grey eyes which looked through you when he spoke and gave a slight hint of the determination, coolness, and energy which made his name famous all over the southwestern border." Troop F performed various duties in New Mexico, including garrison, escort, and enforcement expeditions. Howard's reputation for toughness grew. In August 1870, Troop F was ordered to Tucson in the Arizona Territory to participate in efforts to subdue the hostile Apache. A detachment under Howard was to become a flying squad, available to quickly respond to Apache raids and movements. In the spring of 1871, Howard led a scouting expedition southeast of Tucson to the Mexican border. Near the Mustang Mountains, a detachment of 8 men, including Howard, followed a trail deliberately left by an Apache woman. This small party fell into a trap, facing over 100 armed warriors led by Hu. Perhaps recklessly, Howard tried to stand his ground against very long odds. Shot in the head, Howard died on May 5, 1871, along with 2 others of his detachment. The surviving troopers escaped and returned with the balance of Troop F on May 12th. The Apache war party had scattered, and Howard and his 2 men were buried at the site of the fight. Howard's body was eventually recovered and finally interred at the Presidio in San Francisco. Lieutenant Howard Cushing died at age 32. Having never married and leaving no children, his $112 in accumulated pay was sent to his mother in Fredonia. William stayed in the smaller post-war Navy. While on duty at the Boston Navy Yard, William met Catherine Forbes, a friend of his sister. William and Catherine married in 1870 and had 2 daughters. The wedding was a major local event, featuring a Naval War hero who had achieved modest wealth the hard way through prize money. The editor of the Jamestown Journal, C.E. Bishop, tried to boost sales by creating controversy, accusing William of being the most ineffable, idiotic young snob that ever trod leather. Upon returning from his honeymoon, William went to the journal's offices, produced a whip, and thrashed Bishop until newspaper employees intervened. No charges were ever brought. William rose to the rank of commander in 1871 and saw duty both ashore and at sea. His reputation as Albemarle Cushing opened doors around the world. In 1873, the military governor of Santiago de Cuba began executing the crew of the Virginius, a private vessel that had been apprehended delivering arms to Cuban rebels. The crew included American and British citizens. William arrived in command of the USS Wyoming. When the military governor would not agree to stop the executions, William asked that civilians be allowed to evacuate the city prior to his commencing bombardment. The threat being deemed credible given William's reputation, the governor capitulated. William's chronic tuberculosis infection, always a burden, worsened after a period of long sea duty. Made the senior officer of the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard, William was comforted by his wife and daughters as his health continued to decline. The infection may have attacked his skeleton. William became delirious from pain. He died on December 17, 1874, at the Government Hospital for the Insane, with Catherine and his mother Mary present. William had recently turned 32. Though he had never formally graduated, William was buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, Maryland. Milton Jr. also succumbed to tuberculosis, dying at the age of 50 in 1887. Mary Cushing outlived all her sons, reaching the venerable age of 81. The baby and only daughter, Mary Isabel, died at 80 in 1926. William achieved the greatest notoriety in his lifetime and remains the best remembered of the Cushing brothers. 5 U.S. Navy vessels have been named for him, including the first torpedo boat and 4 later destroyers. Both the Navy SEALs and the U.S. Navy Destroyer Service look to William Cushing as an inspiration. Alonzo Cushing was awarded the Medal of Honor on November 6, 2014, 151 years after dying by his cannons at Gettysburg. This belated recognition is largely a tribute to Margaret Zueck of Delafield, Wisconsin, an amateur historian who once lived on the land where Alonzo and William were born. Miss Zueck pleaded with politicians and military officials for more than 30 years to obtain for Alonzo the recognition she felt he deserved. She was in attendance at the White House, aged 94, for the Medal of Honor award ceremony. Howard, always the most obscure brother, is remembered in a street name in Tucson, Arizona. The brothers are collectively memorialized in a park and monument in Delafield, Wisconsin. Though they varied in temperament, the Cushing brothers shared some remarkable characteristics. They were strongly committed to preserving the Union in the American Civil War. The Cushing brothers, including Milton Jr., were deeply devoted to each other. William, Alonzo, and Howard were inspiring leaders. Men would follow them into impossible challenges. Each displayed a breathtaking level of bravery. Finally, all 3 possessed a profound drive and fierce determination that was a shared legacy from their mother, Mary Cushing. And all 3 died while in the service of the country they had sought to preserve. Now, if you're new to us, you may not know that we have the website, thehistorynetwork.org, where, among other things, we have a store where you can buy previous seasons as chaptered audio files for download. and these are just £2 each, and each of those sales helps support us, so we would welcome your custom there. You may also not know that Angus himself does his own podcast dedicated to World War II, and you can find more about that at ww2podcast.com. We also produce other podcasts too, and you can find out all about these at the website thehistorynetwork.org. Of course, if you want to drop us a line, would like to write a script for us, or have an idea about a subject that you'd like to hear come up, then you can drop us a line at info@thehistorynetwork.org. We are always very happy to receive your emails. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Gary Pollard, read by Nick Barker.